All right, you all excited?
Yeah.
Woo! All right, hey, my name is JT Agley. I'm a Williamsburg resident, and I'm the chair of the Iowa County Democratic Party. Just quick plug, our meetings are on the second Tuesday of the month at different locations. This Tuesday will be the East Annex Building in Marengo across from the courthouse at 6 p.m. So please see me, Betty, Kathy in back there. Please see them if you guys are interested in your Iowa County residents. We'd love to see you there. Also, just Google Iowa County Democrats. Look at our website. We got a calendar on there. Thanks for coming tonight, guys. I have to say what I really always liked about Beto is reliability. He's married with young children, who cares about much, and I am married with young children as well. He's in his 40s. I'm in my early 40s. He is 6'4". I am 6'3.5". He doesn't much like Ted Cruz, and neither do I. He also recognized that climate change is not only real, but is the greatest threat that we're facing today, and he vows to work on that from day one. So I feel the same way about that. He is one of only 2 presidential candidates right now that has a detailed plan for immigration. That includes stopping this insane family separation policy that's going on right now. So being from El Paso, Texas, he serves as part of the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere. He knows the importance of a comprehensive immigration plan is needed. I feel the same way. He recognized that he has a plan to strengthen voting rights, increasing voting participation, and taking down voting barriers that people are facing today to make each vote count. He even suggests limiting permanent incumbency that plagues our Congress today. I feel the same way. Being an elected Democrat in the state of Texas, he also knows the importance of working on both sides of the aisle to benefit all Americans. I feel the same way. Finally, a few words about the future opponent. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I've always known a little bit about Donald Trump, right? My perception, even as a child, was that Trump was a slummy landlord, a shrewd businessman, a bully, and someone who would steal the shirt off your back. He was the villain, the antagonist of the story that the hero is always battling. He is like Biff Tannen in Back to the Future, and he is like Henry Potter, the banker from It's a Wonderful Life. So half you guys will get that reference, the other half will get the other one. So.
He's also a pot.
Yep. Now he is our president. Can you imagine going back and telling your younger self that this man would someday be president? It's very surreal. So alongside with Beto, let us all be the hero of the story, guys. Let us defeat the villain. We don't need a second or third installment of the story of Trump. Heroes win, no sequel, done. With that, I'm proud to introduce Beto.
JT, Ann, thank you for the welcome and for organizing this. To each of you, thanks for making some time out of your day to welcome a couple of strangers from far west Texas into your extraordinarily beautiful community. The drive-in, Amy and I, who hail from the Chihuahuan Desert at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, beautiful in its own right, but not as green as what you have going on here. This is really an inspiring part of the country, and we're grateful to be here. We were also really struck by the way that the community has come together around and for Tate Schaefer. We saw all the Tate signs as we were coming in, not just on the side of the road, but up in the windows of the businesses, and that really moved us as well. We read a little bit about his story, and so we also send our strength and our best wishes to Tate and to his family and to this entire community. This is my 5th visit to Iowa over the course of this campaign. Each one gets a little bit better. Really love what you all are doing with the weather over the course of this. From March, when there was snow piled up on the side of the roads, to today, one of the most glorious days I've ever experienced in my 46 and a half years on this planet. It's really been wonderful, and we're grateful to spend part of it with you. I thought, given the fact that this is Amy, my wife's first visit to Iowa, she got in day before yesterday. We were joined yesterday. I'd flown in from Atlanta. She'd come in from El Paso the day before. Wanted for her to be able to introduce herself. We've been married now almost 14 years this September. We're raising 3 extraordinary kiddos, Ulysses, who's 12, Molly, who's 10, Henry, who's 8. And the reason they're so extraordinary is because of their mother and the leadership and the guidance that she's provided to them and in our household. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to briefly introduce you to my wife, Amy O'Rourke. Amy, come on up.
Thanks. Really happy to be with all of you here today. Beto's been, like he said, this is his 5th time to Iowa, and every time he comes home and he cannot stop talking about how wonderful the people are here. So much in the same way that as we traveled across the state of Texas, we were just constantly overwhelmed by people's kindness and love and energy that they were putting out towards us and towards this country. It was just so very happy to be here to meet you all myself and get to see. Never been to Iowa. I really, it has just been the most beautiful drive through the state, and not at all what I imagined. So really glad to see it in person. But I met Beto 15 years ago. I was passing through El Paso. I wasn't raised in El Paso. Born in Chicago, lived on a cattle ranch in New Mexico. Had taught abroad and was really just looking for a place to go, coming back from Guatemala, and ended up in El Paso, was set up on a blind date with Beto, and really from there was sort of thrown into this life of politics. He announced he was going to run for city council 2 weeks after meeting him, and so I got to know El Paso as we knocked on doors together, went to neighborhood meetings, and so not only did I get to know Beto, but I really got to know El Paso, which I have since just absolutely fallen in love with and love living there, love raising our children there. So much in the same way that we ran that first city council race, knocking on every door that we could, when Beto decided to run for Congress, we did the same, knocked on over, I think, 15,000, 20,000 doors, and really wanted to listen to people to find out what was on the front of their minds, what issues they were facing. And then took that to our race in the Senate and traveled to all 254 counties. I didn't actually. I tried to go to as many as I could, but and again have just been inspired by so many stories, both of what people are doing, but also just the barriers and the challenges that people day in and day out are fighting for. So again, just happy to be here. Thank you for the warm welcome. And at the end, very happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
Great. Cool. Thanks,
The 3 kids that we're raising together, who just finished 6th and 5th and 2nd grade, are all in wonderful public schools. The youngest 2 in the same public school I went to when I was their age, Mesita Elementary. A public school when my parents would have been there. If you'd spoken Spanish in the hallways, you would have been expelled. When I was there, there was a Spanish class, maybe 45 minutes every other day. And that school where kids go now is a true dual language school. So they're learning math in Spanish on Monday, they're learning math in English on Tuesday. They're reading and writing and thinking in both languages and making the most of what JT described as the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere. 3 million of us speak in those 2 languages, making the most of who we are. And so we're well aware of the extraordinary service that public school educators provide. We see it in our own kids. We are the beneficiaries of it as their parents. The instructors in the classroom, the cafeteria worker who serves them at lunch, the janitor who cleans up at the end of the day, the school bus driver who gets them to school safely and on time, the counselors, the therapists, the librarians, the nurse, everybody who makes public education possible. But both Amy and I are deeply concerned that in our home state of Texas, on average, public school educators are working 2 or 3 jobs right now just to make ends meet. And I, for one, want them to only have one job and be able to afford to just have one job, to focus on that child in front of them and unlock for them and for all of us their lifelong love of learning so that they can be whoever they're supposed to be and contribute to their own and to our shared greatness as a country. This foundation of a world-class public school system is fundamental to our economic success and informed democracy so that we have great representatives and presidents going forward because we make intelligent decisions for one another. But in my home state, and it turns out I'm learning in yours, we have compromised that opportunity for success. In 2017, this state prohibited public school educators from being able to organize and demand better wages, better working conditions, and the ability to deliver better instruction to our kids. I want to make sure that we invest in and prioritize public school education. I want to make sure that no teacher in America is working 2 or 3 jobs. I want to make sure that no American has to work 2 or 3 jobs. In addition to those school teachers, I want to make sure every working American can focus on just one job. $7.25 an hour is not going to cut it for anyone in any part of this country. You cannot work full-time at that one job and pay the rent, put food on the table, pay that note on that student loan that you took out in order to better yourself through higher education. So supporting teachers, but supporting working Americans with a higher minimum wage, paid time off to take care of yourself or a family member if they are ill or you need to, making sure that childcare is affordable for every single American, and that healthcare is not a function of privilege or fate or luck or chance, but is a human right that you can count on, so that you are well enough to work that job or to finish that education or to raise that family or to run for office or to chair the Iowa County Party. Whatever you are supposed to do in your time on this planet, I want to invest in your ability to be educated enough, well enough, and have the economic dignity in your life to actually enjoy that life that you have made for yourself and for your family. When we look at some of the other challenges that we have, on one of our last visits to Iowa, we were in Pacific Junction, and the residents of that community in the southwest part of this state told me that their hometown had never in any meaningful way ever flooded before. And here I was meeting them at the doorstep of their home that had been completely submerged in water. Every possession of any value inside of their home ruined and lost to them forever. We saw the greatest flooding from the Missouri River in the history of the Missouri River, because we saw the greatest runoff into the Missouri River since we've been keeping records of the Missouri River. And as I was doing that, we were reading reports that Davenport, on the other side of the state, along the Mississippi, had broken the flooding levels set in 1993. And listening to those farmers in Pacific Junction, those business owners in Davenport, clear to them and clear to me that this is no accident, no act of God, no force of Mother Nature. This was caused by you and by me. Climate change from our own emissions, our own excesses, and our own inaction in the face of the facts and the science. The 58 inches of rain that fell from the sky and drowned Houston, Texas, that's the greatest rainfall from a single storm in 2017. And it was the third 500-year flood in that community's last 5 years. The wildfires in California that were preceded by the greatest droughts that that state had ever seen. Everything that I'm just describing, as bad as it is, as the number of lives that we've lost, the property forever damaged, communities in some cases completely wiped out, will pale in comparison to what we will see going forward if this planet continues to cook along this current trajectory. So we must do everything within our power in the 10 years that scientists say that we have left to make sure that we meet this challenge before it is too late. Now, whether you care about the climate, thank you, man. Whether you care about the climate, or healthcare, or public school education, or an economy that truly works for everyone, we're going to need to come together right now to make sure that we meet these challenges. But our work is cut out for us because this very polarized country is being further divided every day by one of the most dangerous presidents we have ever had. And our democracy, perhaps the single greatest mechanism humankind has ever devised to reveal the potential and the genius of a people, already damaged is being undermined by a president who will stop at nothing to maintain his hold on power, attacking the press as the enemy of the people, trying to undermine our judiciary, inviting the participation of a foreign power in our democracy in 2016, and then obstructing the pursuit of justice afterwards. If we're going to meet the challenge of this moment, we need to be able to bring everyone in and make sure this democracy works for everyone. As Amy said, our entire life in public life has been spent trying to do that. On city council, holding town hall meetings like this every single week. In Congress, doing it every single month. In Texas, running for the United States Senate, going to every one of the 254 counties. No matter how small or rural or red, we showed up. Not to the reddest counties in Texas, but to the reddest counties in the United States of America. So red you can see them glowing from outer space as you orbit the Earth. One of those counties voted for Donald Trump 96% in the 2016 election. But I hope you agree with me, every bit as deserving of being respected and heard and listened to, served and fought for. So we showed up for them as we did for the big blue places. We weren't going to take them for granted, just like we weren't going to write anybody off. And at the end of the day, though we did not defeat Ted Cruz, I won more votes than any Democrat had in the history of the state of Texas. We won independence for the first time in decades. 500,000 Republicans voted for a Republican governor on the same ballot that they voted for me. And we had to show up with nothing more or nothing less than the courage of our convictions, a bold, progressive agenda on every one of the issues that we just talked about, and many more, but a willingness to learn and listen from those whom I hoped to serve. And though I did not win, 2 new members of Congress, both Democrats, replaced Republicans, helping to flip the House of Representatives. 17 African American women elected to judicial positions of prominence in Houston, Texas, literally changing the face of criminal justice in our state's biggest city and this country's most diverse city. So in other words, when it's not about a person or a party, but a movement comprised of all of us, where we bring our story and our solutions to the challenges and problems that we face, there is nothing that can stop us. That's the way that I'm running this campaign. It is the way that I would like to serve you as President of the United States. And I'm grateful for your time, your attention, and the questions that you will ask, and the yarmulke that you gave me when I walked in. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
I have a question.
There we go. This one's off. Check it. Okay, and then Cynthia will bring you a microphone.
So I think if I turn this one on, it's not working. We'll share.
Okay.
We'll share.
Here we go.
And, sorry, can I borrow that just 1 second? So, there's a gray sedan running, and the car is still running. It's parked in the handicap section. So if anybody has a car, gray sedan parked in the outside, please, if you can turn it off.
A little bit about myself. I was born in Des Moines, Iowa, into a lawn and garden company. My grandfather invented an irrigation tool called the Ross root feeder.
Microphone's off.
And one of my jobs working for my dad was to go to El Paso, go to Fort Bliss, and sell my Ross root feeders there. We no longer have the company, but in the spirit of my grandfather, I decided to take his vision of putting people close to God and nature to the next level by root feeding society, and I created something called the Weed Out Hate Initiative to get people to compost the hatred that we see in society today into nurture, love, and compassion. And what I see and why I like you as a candidate, sir, is that where Donald Trump and Ted Cruz gush your oil and hoard oil like Saudi princes, you gush your light. You empower society. You empower Texans to tap into that great Texan entrepreneurial spirit the culture was born with. That when we talk about making America great again, I say there's another level. You can help, pardon the expression, make America kosher again.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Really appreciate that, and appreciate you welcoming us right when we walked in the door, and the kindness with which you received us. Hate crimes in this country are up each of the last 3 years. And perhaps connected to what you just said, a president who describes Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, though we know they commit crimes at a lower rate than those born in this country. A president who has proposed banning the travel of all people of one religion. He said as a candidate he would stop all Muslim travel to the United States, and then once president, by executive order, attempted to do that. A president who described Klansmen and Nazis as very fine people. It doesn't just offend our sensibilities. If left unchecked, it changes the very character of this country, and it produces policies and practices that are incredibly harmful for people. So just a couple of examples. On the day that he signed his executive order attempting to halt Muslim travel to the United States, the mosque in Victoria, Texas, in my home state, was literally burned to the ground. I don't think that you get kids in cages at the US-Mexico border until you have first described asylum seekers as animals or an infestation. In other words, you've dehumanized them a little bit to make it permissible to treat them as something less than human. We've got to make sure that we see not just the opportunity to treat each other with tolerance and respect, but to embrace our very differences, understanding that is the strength and the essence of the foundation that we have that has allowed us to become the greatest country on the face of the planet. I tell my kids this, and I've got to remind myself of it as well. We are the exception, not the rule in world history. Most other nations, for as long as there have been human civilization, have defined themselves by common race or ethnicity or ancestry. We instead decided at the very outset, 243 years ago, that we are all created equal. Now we've got to live up to that promise that we set out. And every day we've got an opportunity to do it in our own lives. And in this campaign and in our administration, we hope to ensure that this country truly lives up to that. So thank you.
If you cultivate hatred into nurture, into love, you bring out the best in what we have to offer.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Hi there. My name's Leslie, and I am an advocate for people with serious mental illnesses. So you spoke about how we have dehumanized people. Probably the largest segment of our population, about 10 million people, have schizophrenia and other serious mental illnesses. And we have done nothing but neglect them and abandon them. And they've ended up in our prisons, and our graveyards, and our streets. And I'm wondering if you're open to receiving some federal policy recommendations and state policy recommendations for decriminalizing the treatment of people with untreated and undertreated mental illness. I'm interested in your comments on that.
So in answer to your offer, absolutely yes. And Cynthia, I want to make sure that not only do we take the literature that you provided, but get your contact information so that we can stay in touch. I was in San Antonio, and I was meeting with members of a chapter of NAMI there in San Antonio, fierce advocates for those who have mental health care needs that are unmet today. And they talked about one young man with schizophrenia who did not have health insurance, and the only way he was able to get care was by going to an emergency room. And over the course of 1 month, he showed up at that ER 40 times and racked up a bill of $38,000, which he is in no way prepared to pay. And that will continue month after month. Now, he may not pay for it, but the taxpayer in Bexar County, home to San Antonio, they will be paying for it. If you are fortunate enough, and that's all you are, fortunate enough to have insurance, you'll pay for it through rising premium costs and the cost of delivering health care in America. Imagine for a fraction of the cost, we had guaranteed high quality universal health care that included guaranteed quality mental health care. We could provide outpatient mental health care services to that young man. He'd be well enough to work a job, to pay taxes, to raise a family, to live to his full potential over the course of his life. But it's not just emergency rooms. The largest inpatient mental health care facility in the state of Texas is the Harris County Jail. The largest provider of mental health care services in my home state is the county jail system. It costs us $110 a night to keep someone locked up who got arrested on purpose in some cases out of desperation to go to the one place that they were guaranteed that care, sometimes in rural communities where there is no ER to go to. It's the county jail to which they turn themselves in. So the moral dimension, which is what compels me, tells us that we should be there for one another, especially in the wealthiest, most powerful country on the face of the planet. But even if we're just looking at being fiscally responsible, a mantle that Democrats should be able to claim going forward. We would pay a fraction of the cost of mental health care if we were to pay it upfront, proactively, consistently, with world-class care, and we'd get so much more out of our fellow Americans. So thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Hi, my name's Chloe Gerard, and I was born in Nanning, China, and then I immigrated here to the United States. And I recently graduated from the University of Iowa about a month ago, and I have a job and everything, but I'm also wondering what I'm going to do because I have a substantial amount of debt from going to college. And I was wondering what your plans are to address the upcoming debt crisis that people around my age are going to start having, especially in the coming years.
Great. Thank you, Chloe. Yeah. You're absolutely right to describe this as a crisis. There's about $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt right now. We're seeing a default rate, seeing a default rate of about 10% right now. So we know that this debt is crushing to those who are making those payments monthly, but also making the payment on their mortgage, also putting food on the table and just trying to get on with their lives. So how do we address this? I think we would begin by stopping any further digging of the hole, making sure that community college or the first 2 years of higher education are free for every American. Make sure that 4 years are debt-free. So that means not just tuition, but room and board and books. And then if you have some of that outstanding debt, I want to make sure that we refinance it at the lowest possible levels. And then I mentioned school teachers and public school educators. If you're willing to dedicate some part of your life to public service in one of those classrooms, or you're willing to fill one of the unfilled positions at the VA, there's 45,000 clinical positions at the VA that are unfilled today, which explains why some veterans wait not minutes or hours, but weeks and months to be able to see a provider, to be cared for the conditions they incurred in service to this country. If you're willing to work at the VA, if you're willing to do some kind of public service, let's wipe clean your debt altogether so you can focus on those kids in the classroom, those veterans in your clinic, or some other in-demand, underserved public service that you could be providing for your community and for your country. And then last idea, not everybody is going to want to go to college, but everyone wants to be able to have a life of dignity and purpose. So elevating the power of unions and allowing more young people to join an apprenticeship where they will learn a skill or a trade that will allow them to command a living wage for the rest of their lives, and make sure that it's not just young people. If you're 45 or 55 years old and your job has just been automated out of existence, or you've finished raising your children, you were an at-home dad or mom and you want to return to the workforce, those unions provide an excellent connection back into that workforce, and not at minimum wage, but at much higher wages for higher skill, higher value jobs. So that's my plan, to make sure that higher education is affordable and that you're both college and career ready at any point in your life. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Dan.
Hey, Dan.
Okay, I'm self-employed and my sister's self-employed. Now, my sister's health insurance costs $25,000 out of pocket before her insurance kicks in a penny. Okay? Fortunately, I'm retired military and I have the VA and TRICARE. So, the most I'll ever pay for my insurance is $3,000 a year. Okay? Now, my question, for me, having this as a market solution. Why don't we start, the Republicans say, oh, that's socialism, one-payer healthcare. Why don't we start framing the argument as this is a market solution? Because in a free market, the market will always decide, the most efficient allocation of resources. And one payer is that.
Thanks for your question. And I like the way that you put this. Right now, especially in smaller communities and counties in Iowa and in Texas, there's very often only one insurance provider competing for yours or your sister's or our business. It's tantamount to a monopoly. What if we really introduced competition and allowed the market to work? What if you could choose to use Medicare instead of that private insurance provider. That's true competition that would drive down the cost of premiums, of co-pays, the size of deductibles. Our plan, Medicare for America, says that if you're one of the tens of millions of our fellow Americans that has no insurance or health care right now, you're enrolled in Medicare. If you're one of those Americans who has insufficient health care, meaning you're insured but you can't afford the copay or the premium, you can choose to enroll in Medicare. But if you're someone who has employer-sponsored insurance and you like it because it works for you or your family, if you're a member of a union that fought for a better health care plan, perhaps in lieu of a pay increase, and you like that plan that you fought for, you're able to keep that as well. If the goal remains universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care, mental health care, primary health care for women, every woman being able to make her own decisions about her own body and having access to the health care that allows her to do that, then I believe that this is the surest, fastest way for us to get there. Thanks for asking the question.
There's a lot of good people that voted for Trump on a single issue, and that was abortion. And from my understanding, this is a democratic country. Instead of talking about stacking up the courts with your side, your opinion, why not make this a democratic issue that's voted on in 2022 as a referendum, instead of having the politics between Republicans and Democrats for the next 20 years? Constitutional amendment.
That's a possibility, and that's allowed for under our Constitution. But I would argue that when you have an election for president, you're also having a national referendum on every single one of these issues that we care about. Coming to town halls like this one, answering questions like these, ensures that you can hold me accountable right up front for the issues that you care most about, whether that's abortion or a woman's right to choose, healthcare, mental health care, public education, the rise in hate crimes in America. You're getting to hear my answers on these issues, as you should be able to do for every other Democratic contender and for the Republican nominee, who we assume will be President Trump. On this issue, I believe that it is a woman's right to choose and to make her own decisions about her own body. And I respect that other people will feel differently about this issue. And their opinions on this, their beliefs, should be respected. But at the end of the day, I believe this is a fundamental issue of healthcare. We are, in this country, in the midst of a maternal mortality crisis, 3 times as deadly for women of color. We've seen in states like mine, where more than a quarter of the family planning clinics have been closed, we've made it harder for a woman not only to access a safe, legal abortion, but a cervical cancer screening, family planning provider, or a provider of any kind in a state that refused to expand Medicaid. So this is a matter of life or death for the women in this country. And I want to make sure that we side with them in our nominees to the Supreme Court and to every federal bench, but also in a Department of Justice that will vigorously side with women every time this comes up, and then making sure that Congress, another democratic institution that can help decide this issue, ensures that no state can exempt the women in that state from being able to have their fully recognized reproductive health care rights. So appreciate you asking the question, and yes, let's make sure that our democratic institutions reflect our values and our policy goals on this issue. Thanks.
Yes, we have a national election coming up in 2020. My question to you, although you are not a member of Congress, how does Congress and the President have any plan at all to protect our voting rights at the ballot box when the Russians come meddling again? And they are here already.
Congress, yes. The President, no. The Mueller report is released. A person whose integrity cannot be challenged, who exhaustively reviewed the facts, interviewed the witnesses, brought more than 24 indictments, 5 of them members of President Trump's campaign team. And the conclusion beyond the shadow of a doubt is that the country of Russia systematically attacked our democracy, involved themselves in the 2016 election. Now, I agree with the gentleman before, it does not matter if you voted for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or you did not vote at all. We're all Americans first before we are anything else. And based on that premise, all of us should care that a foreign power attempted to subvert our democratic will in this country. And what alarms me is that our president's response to that, after the Mueller report was released, was to literally call Vladimir Putin, with whom he spent an hour on the phone, and to whom he described the Mueller report as a hoax. Now that is a green light that he's given to Vladimir Putin to continue to involve himself in 2020 and beyond. Your question is, how do we meet that threat? I announced a bold set of democracy reform proposals yesterday. Among them was the proposal that we fully fund state governments' protections of our election systems, that there be either a paper ballot or a paper receipt for every vote cast, and that we have audits of the elections that are held in our country and in our counties and in our communities. And then in addition to that, we remove barriers to the ballot box. So voter ID laws or the need for a new Voting Rights Act in states like mine where people are suppressed based on their race or their ethnicity. And then same day and automatic voter registration so that we get tens of millions more of our fellow Americans participating in this democracy. If we add to that an end to gerrymandering, getting big money, no more PACs contributing to federally elected officials, president, Congress, or Senate, and then term limits, because we have faith in one another and we agree that no one is so special that they cannot be replaced by another American who will do just as good, if not a better job. If we do that, plus this investment in election security, then this great democracy, again, will really be up to the challenges that we're talking about at this meeting today. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
You know, I just want to ask this, and I like your plan. My name's Al, and I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm here with my brother from Bakersfield, so we've come a long way to see you. And I like your plan, but what about those of us, and I'm sure you share this concern, that are worried about 2020 and the next 4 years? I mean, your plan would only go into effect on a victory in 2020. What if Trump wins? Because of all these things. Is there anything we can do now, between now and November of 2020?
Yeah, great question. So the proposals I just described would take effect if we were able to get them passed after 2021, after we're sworn in January of 2021. What can we do now? On the democracy front, we're running a campaign without a single dime from PACs or lobbyists or corporations or special interests. On the front of vigilance against foreign attacks, I think it's incredibly important that we have meetings like these, that we're not only getting our information on social media, which was manipulated by the Russians to turn Americans against one another. This eyeball-to-eyeball connection that we're making right now, the ability for anybody to be able to ask a question of me or any candidate is fundamental to our democracy being able to work. And then a level of voter turnout that we have never seen before in this country is the best guarantor or guarantee that our will not be subverted. And so I have to, as I've said all that, I have to also just acknowledge what I said at the outset to the gentleman's question. We have a president who doesn't believe any of the things that I've just said, who will not acknowledge that we were attacked, who will not defend us against the next attack. I also said, I was a member of Congress for 6 years, my colleagues from both sides of the aisle do take this seriously, as does the intelligence community, the CIA and the FBI. They're marshaling their resources to the best of their ability. So this is one where we really got to be together on this one. And country has to be more important than party, than polling, than even our prospects in the next election. Bring those who are responsible for what happened to justice, to send the signal that this cannot happen again. Ensure that Russia bears real consequences for their involvement in our elections. And then we've got to win in November of 2020 so that this cannot continue to persist going forward. Thanks for asking the question.
All right, so I'm an insulin-dependent type 1 diabetic, and even though I'm pretty lucky myself, I've heard many other stories of others like me or suffering from other conditions that have not been able to afford these life-saving drugs that they have because of pharmaceutical companies charging much too high prices for the average person to really for them to be affordable. So my question is, what do you plan to do to combat these pharmaceutical companies from charging these outrageous prices and making life-saving drugs like affordable to the average American? Thank you.
Thanks for your courage and your willingness to share your story to help us focus on this challenge right now. I mentioned the need to ensure that we have guaranteed high-quality universal health care, primary, specialty, mental, women's health care, but also affordability of prescription medications, upon which people depend for their very lives. We got to make sure that we go beyond insurance to guaranteeing care. For diabetics, the ability to afford insulin, be able to take the treatment that's necessary for them to live. For every American. We were talking about a school teacher in Weatherford, Texas, who lost her life to the flu. She had insurance but didn't have $119 in her checking account, which was the cost of her copay for her flu medication. And this is happening in the wealthiest, the most powerful country in the world, the most medically and technologically advanced place on the planet. Insulin was invented 97 years ago by Canadian scientists who sold it to the government of their country for $3 Canadian with no hope for profit because they wanted to save the lives of their fellow human beings. How are pharmaceutical corporations getting rich selling it back to us at the most expensive rates on the planet today? It is because, and it comes back to this question about democracy, they've been able to purchase not just influence or access, but outcomes. It helps to explain not just this, but the fact that those who manufactured the opioid crisis in this country, sold them to prescribers and doctors as a miracle cure, downplayed the addictive properties of them, have paid no material cost, have spent not a single night in jail for the death and devastation that they have visited upon this country. We will not allow them to operate with this level of impunity. We will hold them accountable. We will not take their political action committee contributions. We will make sure that they do not have a seat at the table, but that you do, so that we prioritize the health and the well-being of our fellow Americans before the profits of these pharmaceutical companies. So thanks for asking the question. Thanks for sharing your story so we all understand how important this is. Grateful. Thank you.
My name is Emily Wheeler. I'm a master's student at the University of Iowa. As a woman, I'm very concerned about my reproductive health. I'm also concerned about student debt, as I have $90,000 in student loans. But the issue that keeps me awake at night is how we're going to save our planet. So I want to know what you view as the chief concern in climate change and what your first plan of action is.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Emily.
You're right. There's no greater challenge for us because you and I, others in this room, are going to suffer greater storms and floods and droughts, but our kids and our grandkids, they will see a hell that we can only imagine. If you're concerned about 400,000 apprehensions at the US-Mexico border last year, wait until some countries in the Western Hemisphere can no longer support human life. And that is exactly the direction that we're headed in now. You will then count refugees in the millions coming to this country. I mentioned the floods that we saw in Iowa, the fires in California. So you ask, what do we do? Day one, we stop any new oil and gas leases on federal land. The existing leases that we have, we make sure they reflect the full cost of pollution and climate change. Every procurement decision, every dollar we spend in the federal government, that will also reflect the cost of pollution and climate change. So how we source our building materials, the companies that we work with, all of that will have a climate dimension to it. We'll rejoin the Paris climate agreements, and then we'll work to ensure that we reduce the impact of methane and hydrofluorocarbons, which are many thousands of times deadlier in terms of their impact on the greenhouse gas effect for this planet. I'll work with Congress to marshal $5 trillion of investment over the next 10 years to fully free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, embrace renewable energy and the next generation of technologies that some country, it could be China, it could be us, and I want it to be us, is going to come up with and lead the rest of the world. And importantly, for Iowa, and really for this country, I'm going to put farmers and ranchers and rural communities in the driver's seat. I'm going to make sure that we pay farmers for the environmental services that they want to be able to provide, keep more land in conservation, plant cover crops to pull more carbon out of the air, use precision and no-till and regenerative grazing practices so that we restore our land, purify our water, and save the planet at the same time. If we're willing to do all of those things, as well as fortify those communities who are on the front lines of climate change right now, very often lower income communities and communities of color, then we can take our rightful role as the indispensable nation, convene the other powers of the planet, and ensure that they do their part as well. All of that has to come together if we're going to meet this challenge over the next 10 years. And it cannot be met by half steps or half measures or only half the country. And that's why democracy and bringing everybody in and making sure that everyone's will is reflected is central to our success when it comes to climate change or any other big challenge that we face. Thanks for raising the issue. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Our last question. Hi, my name's Penny, and I'm going to confess to the crowd I'm a Republican, okay? But I'm an alienated Republican, and Donald Trump scares me, and I want to know what your thoughts are on when he is defeated, how are we going to have a peaceful transition of power?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Penny, glad that you're here. And for any other Republicans, you're in the right place. Democrats, independents, you're in the right place as well. My mom is a lifelong Republican who would describe herself as an independent now. And, you know, footnote to that story, we did get her to vote for me for U.S. Senate, so we can make this work. So I remember I was a member of Congress when Donald Trump was elected, and I went to his swearing in. And I remember it was deeply disappointing to a lot of my constituents that I represented. Given what he has said about women, about immigrants, about those living with disabilities, all of the offensive things that he's done, how could you go to honor this man? This is a really good question. But my response was, I go not to honor the man, but to honor our democracy, the institution, and the office. This is really an extraordinary thing. That, you know, 243 years in, we can still peacefully transfer power from a person who for the last 8 years, Barack Obama, you know, almost killed himself trying to improve this country, and then is willingly going to transfer that power to a person who vows to undo everything that he's done. That's the exception, not the rule on this planet and in world history, and let's not mess with that. You know, let's celebrate that. And so I hope, we can't predict what Donald Trump is going to do, and he's already shown that he will stop at nothing to hold on or increase his power. But my hope and my faith really is in the American people and in our institutions, and that we will be up for the challenge and be ready for that moment to make sure that we continue again this time as we have every time before to peacefully transfer that power to the next occupant of the White House. So we're counting on all of us, right? It's our faith in this democracy and our willingness to stand up for it that ensures that we get another 243 years or even another 1 or 2 years. It's all on the line right now.
Impeach.
Thanks for asking the question. Yes. One word answer to that one, yes. Thank you all, Williamsburg, for having us out here today. Really grateful for your time and the opportunity to address you and to answer your questions. Cynthia, are we hanging out here? If anyone would like to take a picture, I'd love the opportunity to shake your hand and thank you for coming out. I'll be here in this corner with Amy, and we'd love to take a picture with you. So we'll be hanging out. Thanks again for having us out.